Hi, everybody. Welcome to English 116, Literature and Film. My name is Lillian Ruiz, and I am the instructor for the class. And what I wanted to do today was just to review our syllabus and our course outline to give you an idea of what it is that we're going to be doing over the course of the semester. And I suspect that you have some familiarity with Moodle, or you wouldn't have already been watching this particular video. And what you can see in our Moodle site is there is a general section at the top that has several icons that you would be using over the course of the semester. The first is entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. That is where I've uploaded our syllabus and our course outline, and I'll be uploading any documents that I would normally distribute as a handout to you. The second is past class sessions, and what I'm going to be doing is to keep the current week active on our Moodle site, and then what I will do is retire that particular week into the past class sessions folder so that you can access it throughout the semester, but what you will see is the current week. There also is a discussion forum that you will be using over the course of the semester that I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as two optional icons. One is an optional chat. So if it turns out that you wanted to chat with me or your classmates or both, you could do so through that icon. And also an optional Zoom if you wanted to meet with me via Zoom. So as I indicated, I'm going to review the syllabus and other documents. And I suggest that you take a hard copy. I rely on hard copies. I think they're just easier to manage. So here are mine. And the first is the syllabus that I wanted to review with you. And you'll see that the top of the syllabus just basically gives some contact information, such as my name, Lillian Ruiz. I'm pretty informal, so most people call me Lillian, but feel free to call me whatever you feel comfortable with. My phone number, and that'll get you to my office. If I'm not in my office, you can leave a voicemail. My office is in North 328A. That is in the Inclusion and Diversity Center. So that's a place for anybody who supports the ideals of inclusion and diversity. We've got a little study area, we've got a little social gathering place, and also a little kitchenette. And my office is housed there if you ever wanted to talk about inclusion and diversity. And my office hours, Monday through Thursday, 9 until 10, or by appointment. So the textbooks, and you've probably noticed this, that in the GCC bookstore, I have the textbooks as listed as recommended because you can use any edition that you would like of the textbook. But the current edition of the textbook is the Compact Bedford Introduction to Literature, 13th edition. And so that will be the edition I'm referencing with its appropriate page numbers. But I will be providing you with web links whenever I can so that you can access material for free as well. I also ordered something that was not included in the textbook, A Raisin in the Sun, which is a play that we will be reading over the course of the semester. You can find both of these in the GCC bookstore, though certainly you can order them online as well. Now, I didn't order a separate edition of A Midsummer Night's Dream, just because, again, you can use whatever edition you'd like, and I suspect that you might already have a copy of A Midsummer Night's Dream, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as the semester progresses. And again, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to find links for just about all of the pieces of literature so that you can access them online as well. And I also have a note that it's assumed you'll have a good dictionary and thesaurus for reference. Not that I'm expecting you to go out and buy any of those things, but I assume you've got them loaded into your computers and your cells, but having access to something as opposed to actually using it, those could be two very different things. And this is a reading and writing class, so I wanted you to be able to use both. So course description. So this is from the course catalog. This is what this class is about. That this class builds and extends on the academic writing process and skills introduced in English Composition 1. So English 101, or what we call English Comp 1, or its equivalent at another institution, is the prerequisite for this course. So you've already had some experience with reading and writing. The difference is that now you're going to focus your reading and writing with literature. You develop close reading abilities for a variety of literary and non-literary texts. And you hone critical research skills as well as research and documentation skills using a variety of genres that can include things like essays, fiction, poetry, drama, and film. Writing assignments emphasize the formal research and documented essay and include creative experiments and literary analysis. And the course includes selections from a wide variety of authors, genres, and texts that engage students in written and visual analysis and research. So the learning outcomes for this class, what should happen by the ending of this class, as a result of successfully completing this course, students will be able to develop an appreciation for and understanding of film and literature, since we're going to be analyzing film from an academic perspective, as well as literature from an academic perspective. So we'll talk about how to do that. See reading, writing, and observing as an ever-evolving process is something that develops over time. We'll use the rules of formal academic writing, but also promote our own sense of voice in our writing. We'll improve oral and written communication skills. I have that on all my syllabi, and I don't just teach English classes. I also teach public speaking classes. I teach media and popular culture classes. I even teach a class in horror films, so I've got lots of eclectic tastes. And how to effectively, that's the key, utilize word processing, email, search engines, and the internet in the study of film and literature. So procedures, how would I do this in an online class? And I try to duplicate as much as possible in my online classes what I would do in a face-to-face class. So if we were meeting in a face-to-face class, we would meet on Monday and Wednesday at 10 a.m. What that means is every Monday and Wednesday by 10 a.m., you will have a video much like this one, discussing the class materials as I'm doing now. And you have a 48-hour deadline to watch that particular video. And then at the ending of the video, there will be a class discussion forum question, which will count as your attendance for that particular class. So it would basically be similar to the kinds of commentaries that we would have in a class discussion. So these class discussion forums are oftentimes opinion-based. And you're not required to respond to any of your peers in their class discussion forums. You're certainly encouraged to, much like you would in a face-to-face class. If you felt moved to respond to somebody in a oral conversation, you can do that. But you are required to read everybody's response. So I know that some people learn best by listening and some people learn best by participating. So you can decide if you want to respond to your peers or not. But you do need to read your peers' responses and my responses in turn. You will see that I respond to all of you. And basically what that will simulate is what we would have discussed in a class discussion. And any of the written assignments that we have, those will be papers in a final exam, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. I ask that you send to my email because that's how my grading program works best, which is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. Because believe it or not, when I started at GCC, we did not have a first initial instituted in our email address because email was so new. And we realized very quickly that that meant that we would have a lot of duplication. So at that point, we instituted the first initial. So I'm one of the very few that has just a surname with no first initial. So if you see an email like that, it means that somebody's been here for a very long time. And for me, that would mean starting in 1993. So I ask that you send your work to me to my email. Again, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu via PDF, because again, that's how my grading program works best. And I will return your evaluated work to you via email. So course requirements, some pretty typical things that you're expected to complete all reading and writing assignments by the due date. There will be 2 out-of-class papers assigned, one approximately midway through the semester, so we would have had a good amount of time to read and to talk about how to write a paper. The other towards the ending of the semester. Both would be approximately 4 to 5 pages long. Both would be critical papers so that you're not doing outside research. You're relying on what we've learned in class. And you have the option of rewriting your first paper, which is due approximately midway through the semester, because I see the first paper is a kind of learning exercise. So once I've reviewed it and given it back to you, if you want to improve your grade, you can do a revision. Now, your second paper will be due at the ending of the semester, so you probably wouldn't have time to do a revision, but perhaps if you got in that second paper early enough, you might have time to do a revision. We would have to negotiate, but definitely everybody has the option of doing a revision with the first paper. And in addition, of course, you will be submitting your discussion form responses for each class and a final exam, which will be open book, open notes. It'll be an essay exam, and you get to choose from several essay prompts. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but let me get to the Institutional Services Disability Statement that Greenfield Community College values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities, is committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need reasonable academic accommodations, contact, please, the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And the contact information is there as well. Again, I recommend that you take a hard copy of this syllabus as well as course outlines so that you can easily access this information. So the discussion form that I was talking about that counts as your attendance, class activity and discussion, is extremely important and can't be made up. So absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. In other words, while each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade, and excessive absences could even result in failure. You don't need to notify me if you're going to miss 1 or 2 classes, obviously, because you've got the option to miss a couple of classes, but do speak with me if you're missing several classes. And consultations, as I indicated, you can meet with me during office hours, Monday through Thursday from 9 to 10, or by appointment. And the information I have here about papers is mostly just logistical, that the papers are due on the days specified via PDF, because again, that's how my grading program works best, to my email address. All papers should be typed and double-spaced, have 1-inch borders. I hope this sounds familiar from your previous English class. Pages should be numbered. There should be a cover page that includes the paper title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of these things as it becomes a little bit more applicable. I understand I'm giving you a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember it all. I wanted just to give you an overview so that you can refer to these pieces of information as they become necessary over the course of the semester. And I will distribute paper topics over the course of the term. Again, I didn't want to inundate you today with too much. And as I indicated, you have the option to revise the first paper if you so like for a higher grade. Consult with me prior to revising a paper, and that the original graded paper must be submitted with the original. Again, maybe 4 to 5 pages. A critical paper. You're not doing outside research. You are analyzing and interpreting based on your own responses and understanding and learning over the course of the semester. I'll skip the plagiarism section and go straight to grading to give you an idea of how you'll be evaluated. 25% is participation and the discussion form that I was talking about that will appear at the ending of each of the videos. Paper number 1, that 4 to 5 page paper due approximately midway through the semester, is 25%. Though I have, again, what I call rolling deadlines so that you can hand in a paper once I've talked about it at any point in the semester. But the sooner you hand it in, the better off you are. And the date that I've chosen for paper number 1 puts us midway through the semester. So that was one of the reasons why I chose that date, because it would be a good idea for you to have feedback by that point. Paper number 2, 25%. Very similar paper number 1, 4 to 5 pages, critical paper, but just on a different text. That'll be due at the ending of the semester. Again, probably there wouldn't be time for you to rewrite it, but there is the possibility of negotiating with me so that if you could get it in early enough, you might be able to rewrite it. And then finally, that final exam, 25%. The final is going to be open book, open notes. I'll give you a series of essay prompts. And what I will do is I will give you 24 hours to do that final exam. If we were in a face-to-face class, you would have approximately 2 hours or so, but I'll give you 24 hours. Not that I expect you to spend 24 hours on that. For an A, excellent, B, good, C, satisfactory. There are 2 letters after that, and I don't like talking about them on the first day of class, so we'll just leave it with the A, B, C. And you can see the criteria for essay evaluation there, which we will review as the semester progresses, because I wanted to transition over to our course outline, which lists what we are going to be doing and when. So this is another document in your syllabus and other documents folder. And you can see underneath the note that I've got that dates and assignments may be subject to change. These are my best guesses of what we are going to be doing and when. Assigned readings should be completed before the dates indicated, ideally. So what that means is that you would have done the reading before I talk about it for that particular class. And this is a unique semester because it turns out that evening classes are starting on Wednesday night and day classes are starting on Thursday. And if we were meeting in a day-to-day situation, we would begin on Monday the 8th. But I wanted to post this video early because my suspicion is that some of you will be accessing it before Monday the 8th. So I wanted you to know what would be happening over the course of the semester. So you can view this video as our introductory video for the 8th. You have basically some time to get your book and to get oriented to the class. There also is a copy of the book on reserve in the GCC library. I'll also be providing free links to the readings whenever I can find those free links. And you can see that on Wednesday, the 10th, is when we begin some of the readings. These are introductory readings to prepare us for reading literature and for watching film. So I understand we're still at the beginning of the semester where people are adding and dropping and so forth. So what would be ideal, though I realize the world is not always ideal, is that by the 10th of September, you would have read the sections Reading Imaginative Literature, Critical Strategies for Reading, Reading Fiction, and I will be providing you with a handout about watching and analyzing films. Now, these sections might be on different page numbers if you're using a different edition of the text, just to warn you. And then you can see in week 2, I'm going to finish up my introduction to what is literature and film by having us talk about writing about literature, writing about fiction, poetry and drama, writing about film, which is a handout that I will be giving you, and having you skim the glossary. And by skim, I mean skim. I don't expect you to read it all in detail. And then we're going to begin by watching our first film. And one film that is incredibly important in terms of film studies is a film that is an older film by the name of Citizen Kane, which oftentimes ends up on the best of lists as perhaps the best film ever made. And certainly when we see something like this, we know that there is a subjective element. But and truly understand film and cinema, you need to understand the importance of Citizen Kane. So what we are going to be doing is watching that film and actually watching it twice. We're going to watch it first just to appreciate it as a film, and then we're going to watch it again with film critic Roger Ebert. You might have heard of him before, analyzing why that film is so important. So we're going to spend a good amount of time with Citizen Kane, several classes. And then you can see on September 24th is when we're going to begin to read some of the literature. We're going to talk about 2 short stories, and both of these will be handouts that I will be distributing, which means that they will be web links that I will be providing you with for the stories A Secret Sorrow and A Sorrowful Woman. These short stories were included in the previous edition of the textbook that unfortunately are not included in this edition of the textbook, but I think they're wonderful ways to begin an examination of what is literature. And then in week 4, we will be reading a short story called The Story of an Hour, which you might be familiar with. And you can see that I've listed the names of the authors and the dates in the parentheses, as well as the page numbers for where you can find this. Rose for Emily, a short story perhaps you've heard of before, as well as the author's commentary on his writing that particular story. It's called Honor Rose. Then a short story that, again, was included in one of the older editions of the book that is not included now, but I think it's important, Young Goodman Brown. So I'm going to provide that as a handout or basically a web link. Soldier's Home by Ernest Hemingway. So basically, we're beginning the semester with film and short story. And then on the 6th, we are going to read a short story called Battle Royal that actually is part of a novel called Invisible Man. And we'll talk about why that is so important. That'll be part of a handout or a web link I'll be providing, as well as a short story called Popular Mechanics, also a handout, a web link I'll be providing. And I've got a catch-up class there as well, because we'll probably start to fall behind a little bit. So I wanted us to be able to have some catch-up moments. You can see that I've got holidays listed. So for instance, on October 13th, we wouldn't be meeting. And then we move to our next unit, which happens to be drama. And we'll talk a little bit about how drama is similar to and different from short story. We'll read a very short drama, one-act drama, Trifles. And we'll talk a little bit about how do you write about drama. And our first major drama is going to be a very old drama that you might have heard of before, Oedipus the King, written in 430 BC Greece. So we'll talk about why we're reading something so old in another language. Obviously, we're reading an English translation. And we will watch a performance. And we'll talk a little bit about why I chose the particular performance by Tyrone Guthrie for Oedipus the King. And around the 22nd is when our first paper would be due. But again, by this point, I'm hopeful that many of you would have already submitted in your first paper, because once I talk about paper number 1 and your prompts over the next couple classes, you're free to begin submitting in a paper. But by the 22nd, that puts us about halfway through. As we are devoting multiple classes to Oedipus, and what would be ideal is, even though we've got multiple classes devoted to Oedipus the King, that you would have had the play read in its entirety by the first class that we're discussing it. And as we are discussing it over several classes, you're reading the next play, which happens to be Shakespeare in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we will be watching a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, the film version by Hoffman in 1999. And we'll talk a little bit about why that particular performance is a good performance for us to watch when we are talking about film and literature. Again, multiple classes devoted to Midsummer Night's Dream. While we are talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream and watching it, hopefully you're at home with our very last play. And the last play is A Raisin in the Sun, and that's by Lorraine Hansberry. We will be watching the Petrie version of that film from 1961. And that gets us into about November 19th, where we've got a catch-up class. And you'll see that while Oedipus is included in your textbook, Midsummer Night's Dream is not. It used to be, and now we have Othello, but there are particular reasons why I wanted us to read Midsummer and not Othello. Nothing else. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a comedy, and I want to try to lighten things up. Again, I didn't order a specific text for the class because there's so many versions of Shakespeare that you can choose, and I'll also be providing a web link. But I'll talk a little bit more about that. I did order a copy of A Raisin in the Sun for you because I suspect that that might be a little bit more difficult for you to find. But, of course, you can always find this online as well. I will be providing links, and you can always access the book through libraries as well as bookstores. And then that gets us into week 12, where we shift to our third unit, which happens to be about poetry. So now we get to talk about what is poetry and how do we read it and how do we write about it. And we'll begin by reading some poems and practicing interpreting them. We'll compare and contrast 2 poems, The Magic of Love poem. Some of these poems are not included in the textbook, so I'll be providing links, which would be considered the handout. We'll talk a little bit about the formal way that a poem is constructed, scanning a poem, and how one goes about doing that with 2 sample poems, one called Waiting for the Storm, the other Upon Julia's Clothes. When we get to film, we are going to be watching a film that is directly related to poetry, which you may have seen before, entitled Dead Poets Society by Weir in 1989. We'll talk a little bit about that film and how it's related to poetry after we see it. And then we'll read some representative poems that we'll read a little bit of Shakespeare, perhaps his most famous poem, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? We'll read William Blake, a romantic poet, and Dead Poets Society talks about the romantic poets. The Sick Rose. This is a very short poem, just about 6 lines or so. And in fact, we'll see that the shorter the poem is, probably the more complex it is. We'll read a little bit of Emily Dickinson because, well, Dickinson is local. Because I Could Not Stop for Death. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, an iconic poem, and also our textbook will give you an example of how that poem could be analyzed. And we'll read both of those. A poem by Allen Ginsberg, which is not included in the text, but I will be providing a link, aka handout, America. A poem by Martina Spada, who happens to be local, UMass Amherst. He wrote a poem called Coca-Cola and Coco Frio in 1993. And the last poem we will be reading and talking about is by Amanda Gorman in 2021, The Hill We Climb. And that puts us in the 10th of December, which is when paper number 2 ideally would be due on drama and film. And early paper is always encouraged. And then we've just got a little bit of time at the end, not much. This puts us into the 15th of December, which is a catch-up class if we fall behind. And finally, our final exam on the 17th, which what I will do is that I will post our final exam at the time in which we normally meet, or would normally meet if we were meeting in a face-to-face class, Monday, Wednesday, and at 10. And you have 24 hours in which to take that final. It's an essay exam, open book, open notes. And again, I don't expect you to spend 24 hours working on that final. I expect you to spend about a couple of hours. The bulk of the final will be devoted to poetry because you would have had a chance to write a paper on short story. You would have had a chance, or film, and you would have had a chance to write a paper about drama or film. But you would not have had a chance to write a paper about poetry or film. So that'll be the bulk of your final, 80 points. But there'll still be 2 short questions. One, 10 points on short story. The other, 10 points drama. And that basically is the class as a whole. And certainly if you've got any questions or concerns, please let me know. What's left is your attendance question, which won't be due until Wednesday because, again, I'm considering this our first class on Monday. Your attendance question is just to introduce yourself to the class. Feel free to upload pictures or audio, but you're not required to. And I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. Next class, we'll finish up with the pieces of the syllabus we didn't get to, and we'll begin talking about, well, literature and film, and how do we go about reading that, because you can read film the way you can read a piece of literature, and how do you go about writing about that. Again, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. We will continue on next class, next week. Take care. Bye-bye.